All right, well, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Eli. I'm the pastor here at Nickel City Church, and man, I'm so glad that you guys are here with us today. Today, we are starting a brand new series called Stories Jesus Told. Now, if we look in the Bible throughout Jesus' life, he was often teaching people. He was teaching the people around him. And one way that he would teach people is by using stories, or what we would call parables. And a parable is just simply a short story, almost like a children's story, that helps us to understand a complex topic. And Jesus really liked this method of teaching. He used parables often. In fact, if we look in the Bible, about a third of the words of Jesus were in story form. So if you look in the Bible at the things that were the very most important things, the things that were written down that Jesus said, a third of them were in story form. And so this series, we are going to be looking at the stories of Jesus, and not just trying to understand the stories of Jesus, but how we can apply those stories to our lives and what these stories mean to us today. Now, how many of you have a cell phone here today? All right. I know this is probably the very worst feeling. How many of you have ever dropped your cell phone? Yeah, and so you probably do something like this. You drop it, and then you go and you pick it up, and you kind of do one of these where you're like a little bit hesitant to turn it around. You're like, is it cracked? Is it broken? I'm not sure. Well, thankfully, I've not had to do this too many times. I've actually never cracked or broken a cell phone screen on my phone, so I'm very fortunate in that way. I've had a cell phone since the end of high school. But there was one time when I got a very small scratch. I had put my phone in my pocket with something that I didn't think would cause it damage. I put it in with a guitar pick, of all things. I was like, well, surely that's not going to damage it. And I pulled out my phone, and at the bottom, I had a little scratch about this big, and man, it was frustrating. I was like, no, like this is happening. I have a scratch on my screen. See, I like things to be new. I like things to be in the condition they came in. I like to try to take care of the things. And so whenever I had to look at this little scratch on my phone, it frustrated me. So I decided I still had coverage on it, and so I decided to go into the Apple store. I went up to the lady. She's like, hey, how can I help you? I said, well, I need to get my screen replaced. She's like, okay, no problem. She takes my phone and goes, why? It's like, you don't see it? There's a scratch. Like, there's a scratch in the bush. Like, where is the scratch? I don't quite see it. And so I ended up getting my phone fixed because I wanted things to be like new again. I didn't want to have a scratch on it or broken. I wanted it the way that it came. And so I got my phone back, and if you've ever had your screen replaced, you get to peel off the sticker all again, right? It's all nice, and it's like almost like brand new. And so I peeled off the sticker and my screen, and the scratch was gone, and I felt good. And then about a week later, my wife was using my cell phone and dropped it and cracked the screen. So it didn't really have a super happy ending to this story. See, my wife is a little bit different. I've never cracked a cell phone screen, but my wife is kind of prone to breaking her screens. And it's not her fault. I mean, she takes care of 3 little kids, and she has to get the cutesy little case that doesn't really protect it, right? It has to be pretty. And so she has broken a lot of screens. In fact, her current phone, she's broken the screen on it 3 times. And it is still broken to this day, and we're kind of at the point where we're like, is this even worth fixing? Is this something maybe that we just take the $100 that it would take to fix the screen and just put it into savings and wait until you get another phone? But I don't know how she does it, because it bothers me so much. She looks at her phone, and she'll go to show me a picture, and she'll be like, hey, take a look at a picture of our kids. And I'm like, it's abstract. It's like a mosaic. I don't see how you can function with this type of phone being broken and cracked. And so it frustrates me. Anyone else like that you're like, oh, I hate when things. I think that in some capacity, we all deal with this. Maybe it's with your cell phone. Maybe you get it new out of the box, and it's that first time that you drop it, and there's that first little dent or scratch, and a part of you just sinks. You're like, oh, that's not how it's supposed to be. Maybe it's with something else. Maybe when you buy a new pair of shoes and you get your first crease in them or your first scuff, and you're like, oh man, like it's losing value at this very moment. Or maybe it's other things. Maybe it's even a new car, and you have a new car, and it still has that new car smell, and you're excited, and then you spill your first cup of coffee in there. And you're like, no, like this is the end of the world, right? And there's a part of us, I think, that we like things to be new. We like things to be the way they're supposed to be. We don't want them broken or used. In fact, I think it's not just with physical items. I think we do this in our lives as well. Maybe there's things in your life, maybe as you look at your life and you see areas that you remember used to be better. Maybe it's something that you look at yourself and something physical in the mirror and you're like, man, I wish I could go back to the weight that I once was, or I wish I could go back to being as in shape as I once was. But maybe it's things inwardly too. Maybe you've been hurt, and maybe people have said things or done things to you, and because of that, you carry this hurt, and you carry this brokenness, and every time you look in the mirror, you're like, I wish I could go back. Maybe it's your marriage, and your marriage feels broken at times, and you're like, man, I feel like I wish I could just go back to the way things were. The way things used to be before there was these problems, before there was this brokenness in our marriage. And so we try to cover it up, or we try to hide it, or we try to just push through. But we all live with this little bit of brokenness in our lives. And then it's not just in our personal lives, but even in the lives of others. We look in the lives of others, and maybe we see the brokenness in other people's lives, and maybe we start to get frustrated, and we look at them and say, well, why can't you just fix this? Why can't you just get it back to the way it should be? Why can't you just get over it? And so I think that we all deal with this in some capacity, where we are a little bit frustrated at brokenness, whether it's physical things in our lives or in the lives of others. But today, I want to take a look at God's view of things that are lost and broken. In fact, I think that we will see that God's heart is for the lost and broken things in our lives. And so we're going to do this by looking at a story that Jesus tells. And so we're going to look in Luke chapter 15. And it starts off kind of setting the scene. It says this: the tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees, who were like the religious leaders, and the teachers of the religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Now, I'm just going to tell you something personal here. Every time I read this verse, I kind of laugh, because I love that they highlight the fact, like, what are they upset about? That he was eating? Like, I'll eat with anyone. I don't know about you, but free food is free food, right? Like, I'll hang out and I'll be chewing some food and I'll hang out. I have no issue, but I love that it kind of specifies it this way, that they were so upset that he was associated with sinful people and even eating with them. I'm like, I'm down for eating anytime, all right? But Jesus hears them and he tells them this story. He says, if a man had 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go and search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. So Jesus kind of tells this story, this parable, this simple story to help us understand a complex idea, to understand the heart of God. And he does it with something that is so practical and down to earth in that time. I love that Jesus kind of uses this language, because if you look at where he's in a very rural town. He is at a place where people know about farming, where they know about what it takes to be a shepherd. They probably know some shepherds, or maybe they themselves are shepherds. But he uses this story and he says, look, if you had some sheep, wouldn't you go and search for one if you lost it, right? And everyone agrees, everyone understands this concept that the 99 don't lose value, but it is worth searching after and going for the one that is lost. And so Jesus uses this story to explain the heart of God, but he doesn't stop there. In fact, in the very next verse, he tells another story, another parable. And he says this, or suppose that a woman had 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she will call in her friends and neighbors and say, rejoice with me because I have found my lost coin. In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. And so he kind of tells another story to help us understand this principle, this idea of God's heart for lost and broken things. And I'll tell you, in my life, I feel like recently my wife and I, we actually lived this story. I'll tell you that real quick. So a little bit ago, we had someone come up to us and say, hey, we feel like God is kind of telling us to give you and your family something. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, you know, what isn't it? We feel like we're supposed to give you some money. I'm like, well, listen, you don't have to give us money. Like, we're good. We don't want you to give us money. We want you to, use it for something good in your life or use it to bless someone. And they said, well, no, we feel like this is really something God is telling us to do. And so I don't know why or how, but we need to give you this. And so we were like, all right. And they handed us a check. And let me tell you, when I opened up this check, I was shocked because it was not a little bit of money. I was like, what do I do with this? This is kind of crazy. I've never had someone give me a large amount of money before. I looked at him and I said, listen, we can't take this. Like, that's not right. No, we feel like God's telling us to give you this. So my wife and I, we decided to kind of pray about it before we cashed the check. We said, well, maybe there's something specific in our lives that we're going to need this money for. So before we do anything with it, let's pray, let's ask God and see if there's something specific we should do, maybe someone that we're supposed to give it to or pass it on to. Let's figure out, what this is going to happen. So we take a few days to pray and figure out, and we felt good about cashing the check a few days later. So we went to where we had put it, and we put it up high on our counter. And as we went back to the counter, the check was not there. Now, we have 3 kids in our house, so things can go missing very quickly, and they are hard to find. And so my wife asked me, she's like, did you take this? Did you move it? No, I didn't. Are you sure you didn't? No, we couldn't figure out if one of us took it. We knew we didn't touch it. So we start asking our older kids, listen, did you take something? We rip out a check from our checkbook. It looks like this. Did you color on it? Did you put stickers on it? Like, where is it? It's okay. We aren't mad. We just need to find this. And it came to a point where our kids were adamant. They're like, no, we didn't touch it, which left our youngest, our 1-year-old, who had just learned to climb. So we are like, oh my goodness, we have to start thinking like a 1-year-old. And let me tell you, we tore our house apart. Like, I'm not talking we trashed our house looking for this check, like cushions coming off. We're looking in like the toy bins. We're looking in their cribs. We're even looking like under the carpet. Like, did he do something with it? And so we're looking everywhere because that's a weird thing, right? Someone just gave us a check. We don't want to be like, hey, I know you just gave us a check, but do you mind writing us another one, right? That's weird. It was so weird, like tearing the house apart. We had friends who came over and were like, listen, if you see a check, we need it. So if you see it around here while you're hanging out, like, let us know. We looked absolutely everywhere. We tore our house apart. Finally, one day I was like, oh my goodness, like, we need to find this. I wonder if it could be in the garbage. Because I had just found our youngest putting his toys in the garbage and shutting the lid. And so my wife and I, we got the garbage bags out. Thankfully, it didn't go to the curb yet, so we pull out these garbage bags. We start tearing them open, looking with no knowledge that it's in there, but we finally are digging through and we found the check. And let me tell you, there was some rejoicing in our house. As garbage is flying around our house and as there's mess and things leaking, we're like, in fact, I called up my friends. It's like, you'll never believe where the check was. Weston put it in the garbage. We had to dig through 3 bags. There was rejoicing. And literally at this point, I was like, Deanna, I feel like we're living the story of the lost coin. Like, I understand that this is something worth celebrating. And so Jesus uses this example. He uses this story to help us understand that people, when they're lost and hurting and broken, that they are worth celebrating when they're found. Whenever they come back to God, when God starts to wrap them up and fix them, that they are worth celebrating when even one sinner, one person who is far from God, repents and turns to him. But Jesus doesn't just tell these stories. In fact, in the next verse, he tells one more story to talk about this same idea, to talk about God's heart. And so I wanted to read that one today. It says this, to illustrate the point further, Jesus then told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So the father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. About this time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I'll go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son, but please take me on as a hired servant. And so the son kind of has this realization. He's like, listen, this is a moment in my life that I'm humbling myself. I'm realizing that I've messed up. I've thrown away all the good things, and I'm not even asking my dad to bring me back, but I'm just asking if he'll at least just make me a servant, put me in the lowest position, and I'll work hard. I'll take care of the things. I'll give up this idea that I'm a son. I don't even think of myself that way. I'll just come back to be a servant. So he kind of creates this plan and starts heading towards home. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. And he says, get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And this is really significant because a ring kind of carried the family crest or the family seal. This is a ring that would help you to be able to buy or sell or trade, and it kind of gave you the backing of your family to say this is proof that we're going to keep our word, and it's through these rings or through this seal. And so he says, give him a ring, not just, hey, get him some food, just warm him up, clean him up a little bit. He restores him and says, we want to bring you back into the family. And so he says, get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and is now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And I love this last line. I want to say it with me. It says, so the party began. I love that line in the Bible because I think it's just so real, right? This is a celebration. This is a time that is worth celebrating. And Jesus uses this story or this parable of these sons. And if we really look at this story and break it down, we see that the son insults his father. He essentially says, Dad, I wish you were dead, right? I wish you were dead so I could get my inheritance now and start my life. I wish that we could just kind of move to the next season. And so his father so graciously says, fine, I'll give you your inheritance. Like, go ahead and take it. And the son goes and squanders it and wastes it. And he realizes that he is kind of in a hard place. He realizes he's going to starve. And so he comes to this realization saying, I need to go back to my family. I need to at least try to come back. I know I'm broken. I know that I'm lost. I know that I've not been there a while. I know I've messed things up. But he at least tries to go back and ask his father if he can at least become a servant. But watch what the father does. I love this. I think we know what the father does. But if we really look at it, we see that the Father didn't even hear the apology yet. He didn't hear or wait for the explanation. He didn't look at the Son and say, okay, well, I'm waiting. What do you have to say? He didn't wait to forgive him until after he already apologized. He didn't wait to restore him until after he said, hey, let me explain to you my situation. The Father runs to him and embraces him because the Father cared more about the relationship with the Son than he did the things that he had done. The Father cared more about his relationship being restored with his Son than all of the bad things that had led them to this point. And I think this is so cool because the Father represents God in this story. And we are the ones who ran away from God. And so we see here in this story that God has a heart for the broken and the lost and the hurting, the people who are far from him. That's good news for us. And this really, these three stories, they all illustrate the same point, and it's to teach us the heart of God. Jesus tells us these stories that tell the same concept or principle just in three ways. He wants to make sure that we understand the heart of God, and the heart of God is for things that are lost and hurting and broken. The reason why God has a heart for the things that are lost and hurting and broken is because God is a God who redeems. God is a God who takes the messes that we make and he can bring good out of them. He's a God who can fix things. He doesn't just care about your brokenness just so he can watch you, but he wants to restore you and redeem you and bring you back to even better than it was before. Now we know that this is true. We know that this is true in the lives of people and in the lives of others. We see Jesus tell this story, which illustrates it, that God has a heart for those who are hurting and broken and lost and far from him. But I think this is actually a principle of God. I think this is something that applies in every area of our lives. I really believe that God celebrates when we take the broken things in our lives and we give them to him. When we recognize that he is a God who makes things new, and we say, God, I have this hurt. I have this brokenness. I have areas in my life that I feel are lost and I've lost hope. But I want to take this brokenness, I want to take this hurt, I want to take these feelings and give them back to you and watch you work in the midst of my life. Because he loves to see broken things be fixed through his love and grace and his power. He loves bringing us back, kind of like the cell phone screen, bringing us back to how things were initially designed to be. To not be living with the cracks and the scratches, but to be redeemed and made new once again. So here's the question that I have for you today is, what's broken in your life? What things are broken in your life? Is it in your heart? Is it the past things maybe that have been said about you? The hurt that kind of cripples you, that every time you think about it, you're like, man, I wish this wasn't here. I wish that I could just forgive. I wish I could just get over this. I wish I wasn't bogged down. I wish I could learn to trust again. Maybe it's something in your life. Maybe it's your marriage. And you say, you know what? I wish that my marriage would be redeemed and restored. I recognize that it's broken. And I wish that things would be better. And maybe up until this point, you've tried to hide it or tried to just push through. But if there's brokenness in your life, let me encourage you that God has a heart for the broken. God has a heart when you think that you've lost hope and when you think that there's no chance of it getting better. This is where God just gets started. There's kind of a big idea that I want you to know today, and I hope that you'll remember this, and it's that my brokenness is where God can shine brightest. That it's in our brokenness, that it's in our weaknesses, it's in the things that maybe seem like they're messed up, that as we turn around and give them to God, as we say, I'm not going to try to hold on to this, I'm not going to try to pretend that it's perfect, I'm not going to try to fix it myself anymore, but I'm going to recognize and say, God, I can't do anything about my brokenness, I can't do anything about this, I've lost hope, I've lost faith, but God, I'm giving my brokenness to you. We know that God has a heart for the lost and the broken. And in your brokenness, as we turn around and give it to God, he can work miracles in your life. So I would encourage us today to do that, to take our brokenness to God, whatever it is in your life. And maybe your life feels good, but maybe there's just one area. Maybe there's one area in your life that is far from God. Maybe it's not your entire life, but maybe there's an area. Maybe it's in your attitudes, or maybe it's a past hurt, or maybe it's in forgiving. Maybe there's an area in your life that you say, I feel this brokenness. Take that one thing to God. Take the brokenness. Maybe you feel like your whole life is broken and falling apart. Take your life to God. So this is the first part of this, is that God's heart is for the broken. But there's a second big idea in this, and it's how we respond to the broken, hurting, and lost. Because the story of the son, it actually doesn't end there. It continues a little bit more. Remember, there's two sons, and we see the younger son go and kind of run away. But here we see the rest of the story with the older son. It says, meanwhile, the older son was in the field working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We're celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. He came out and begged him. The father came out and begged him, but he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing that you told me to do. And in all this time, you've never even once given me a young goat to feast with my friends. Yet, when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. His father looks at him and says, dear son, you've always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. We look at the story, and the older brother basically asks this question. He says, what about me? Dad, what about me? Here you are celebrating the brokenness of my younger brother. Here you see all the things that he has done, all the ways that he's hurt you, all the things that have happened, and you're celebrating him. What about me? It says, I've done everything right. I've worked hard to do things in the right way. I've lived a good life. Why are you forgetting? Why are you overlooking all of the things? And I think sometimes we have a tendency to ask this question in our lives, that we maybe start to lose patience with other people who are broken. We start to let God redeem us. We let God fix us and heal our brokenness. But then when it comes time to looking at others, we start to lose the heart of God. We start to lose patience. And we forget the fact that we once were also lost. We also were once broken. And even in the case of this son, we see the older son, maybe he wasn't necessarily broken, but we see that he forgot that everything that he had come from the Father already. That everything that he had, the Father said, I've given to you, and we share in this. And so I think sometimes we can fall into that same category. Maybe if God has healed your brokenness in your life, maybe there's things, maybe you've been coming to church a while, maybe you've had a relationship with God, that we let God heal our brokenness, but then we lose our patience as God works in the brokenness of others. And if you're here today, I don't want you to feel bad. I'm not trying to condemn you, because in fact, one of Jesus's very own disciples asked this question. In fact, it's the disciple Peter. And Peter is kind of Jesus's right-hand guy. We see Peter with Jesus most every time. And here's what happens in the book of Matthew, chapter 19. Peter is talking to Jesus, and he asks this question. Peter says to him, Jesus, we've given up everything to follow you. What will we get? What will we get? Right? He asked this question. And maybe Peter didn't even ask this in a mean way. Maybe he wasn't like, Jesus, look, we've given everything. Like, what are we going to get out of this? Maybe it wasn't even like that. Maybe it was an innocent question. Maybe Peter goes, Jesus, we know that you reward those, but like, what's our reward? What are we going to get from this? Maybe it was in a positive way, but in any case, Jesus responds to Peter with another story. And this is where we're going to close out today, by looking at one more story. And it's this. Jesus is telling Peter this story. He says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them the normal daily wage and sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them that he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went to work in the vineyard. At noon and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw some more people standing around. So he asked them, "Why haven't you been working today?" They replied, "Because no one had hired us." The landowner told them, "Then go out and join the others in my vineyard." That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first, those who had been there the least amount of time. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first, who had been there the longest, came to get their pay, they assumed that they would receive more. But they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner. "Those people worked only 1 hour, and yet you paid them just as much as you paid us, who worked all day in the scorching heat." He answered one of them, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? So take your money and go. I wanted to pay the last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others?" So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last. And so we see Peter ask this question. We see the older brother ask this question, "What about me?" We see Peter ask, "Well, what are we going to get from this?" We see the laborers in the vineyard saying, "Well, what about us? We've been here the longest." And we see them all kind of ask this same question. You know, I think that in churches, sometimes we fall into this mindset that we say, "Well, what about us? I mean, I've been here the longest, right? I've put in my time. I've put in the work. I've helped to build this church. What about me? What am I going to get from this?" Maybe you've even asked that here at this church. Maybe you're sitting here. Maybe you've been coming to the church for a while, and you hear people get up every week and say, "You know what? If it's your first time here, we're so glad you're here. We have a free gift for you in the back." And maybe you're sitting here and you're like, "Man, when I started coming, they didn't have free gifts. Like, what about me? Where's my free gift, right? I want a free gift." Maybe you've asked that question, "What about me?" Maybe you've done that in church, or you've thought that in church. Maybe as maybe the leaders go up and they talk to people. Maybe it's their first time here and the leaders go and talk to them and get to know them. And you say, "Well, what about me? Like, I want to talk to someone. I've been here. Why am I not talking to people? Why do you have to go talk to someone who's new or someone who's just getting connected? What about me? I'm missing out." Maybe it's even with service. Maybe there's been moments that you're like, "Eli, listen, like every time that we do something, like you have to explain it, and you always start at the very beginning." And when we talk about communion, like, "Eli, I've gone to church, right? I know what communion is. I don't need you to tell me what communion is. Let's just get on with it. Let's just go in." Like, why do we always have to start at the beginning? And we might even ask that question, "Well, what about me? Like, what about what I want?" I think there's a lot of times in our lives that we can ask this question, that we miss the heart of God. When we ask this idea of, "Well, what's in it for me? When am I going to get my reward? When am I going to get my chance?" In fact, I'll tell you a personal story. When this church first started years ago, I wasn't the pastor. I was actually a worship leader here at the church. And as I was a worship leader, I had someone come up to me and they said, "Eli, hey, there's a song that you sing during worship, and I don't like it." I was like, "Oh man, like, I'm so sorry to hear that. What song, and like, what don't you like about it?" And they went on to explain that they didn't like this song because they liked the old version of it. They liked the older style, an older version. They didn't really like what this new song was saying or doing. So I said, man, I can get that. I understand. You know, we all have different preferences. We all have different styles. And that's totally cool. That's awesome that we all are unique in that way. But let me explain to you why we do this song. This is a song that talks about God's love. It talks about Jesus. It talks about his grace and his mercy in such a simple way that anyone in the church can understand it. And so this is why we're singing this version of this song. Because as we understand God's love, as we understand God's mercy, it makes us want to worship. And so we sing this song so that everyone in the church can have an opportunity to understand God's love and worship him because of it. Well, they looked at me and they said, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. It's like, well, I'm sorry, what does that mean? Well, listen, we have been coming to this church for a while. We give money to this church. We serve at this church. We should have input. This is a service for us. We should be able to pick the songs that we like to worship to. And thankfully, I didn't have to respond in that moment. But I thought to myself, I was like, man, how far from the heart of God are we? How far from the heart of God are we walking away right now when we start to think that church is about us? When we think that it's about our preferences and our styles and the things that we enjoy or like? Because the reality is that church isn't here for our comfort or our convenience, but church is here for our growth. In fact, in the Bible, it says the purpose of church, it says that it's to equip the saints, the Christians, for every good work. Some translations would say it's to equip the saints to do every work of God. But let me tell you this, is that you can't be equipped to do the work of God while missing the heart of God. You can't be equipped to be more like Jesus in your life. You can't be equipped to do the work of Jesus if you're missing the heart of God. The stories Jesus tells 3 times in a row to say God's heart is for the lost and the hurting and the broken. We can't be equipped the way God wants us to while ignoring the fact of God's desire for the people who are hurting and lost and broken. And maybe you came to Nickel City Church and maybe there are things that you really liked. And I'm glad, I hope that you did. Maybe you liked the style of the music, or maybe you liked the lights, or you liked something about it. Maybe you liked the cafe. That's great. I'm glad that you liked those things. I like some of those things too. I think that it's a fun way for us to connect to each other. But let me tell you that the things that we do at this church are not sacred. Okay, so if you signed up for this church because you liked a style, or because you liked the service order, or because you liked something else, let me tell you, that's not what we signed up for. We signed up to say that we believe in a mission of a church to say we are going to have the heart of God for people who aren't here. So the things we do, they are intentional. There's reasons why we pick the songs we do. There's reasons why we have the style of music that we do. In fact, I have people who walk by in the summer and the doors are open and they pop in. Man, I never thought the church would look or sound like this, and it piques their interest. It's the person who is lost and hurting and broken. And they come in and they say, well, I kind of thought church maybe was about something else. There's a reason why we do these things, but let me tell you that those things might change. So if you're here simply because you like the songs, let me tell you that we probably won't be singing the same songs 10 years from now. And that might hurt for some of us, because some of us might say, well, these are songs that I first met Jesus with. These are songs that remind me of my relationship with God. Well, listen, that's great. I'm so glad we can have different preferences and styles, and you can worship to those songs. But it's not the method that's sacred, it's the mission. The heart of God is for lost and broken and hurting people, because he's a God who redeems and restores. I'll tell you one more story, and I just want to tell you this story because I think I don't know if I can say this, I think it's cute. Is that I think that's all right, right? I think it's such a cute story because I think it's just so funny and so real. A little bit ago, it was pretty recently, we had a guy, the doors were open, and there was a guy who was kind of just hanging out here outside before service. And as he was hanging out before service, I kind of saw he was peeking in, but didn't want to come in, so I decided to go talk to him. I said, hey, listen, how are you doing? You want to come in? We got coffee and pastries. Come hang out. We'd love to have you. He looks at me and says, oh, no, I can't come in. I was like, sure you can. Like, come on. He's like, no, listen, you don't understand. I only was walking this way because I was walking to Consumers. I had to get some more beer. I woke up, I was drinking, and I had to get more beer. I ran out, and so he had his little 6-pack with him. He's like, I can't come in. I'm a little bit drunk. And he whispered that to me. I was like, well, perfect. We have coffee. Come on in. Like, listen, this is a good thing. It's not that we don't want you here. He's like, I don't know. I'm the pastor. Like, come on. Like, it's cool. Let's go. So I explained to him. He's like, all right. And he kind of tries to tuck away his beer. He tries to hide it. I'm like, you want me to hold that for you? Like, I'll keep it with me. Like, what do you need? And so he comes in. He's like, I'm just going to sit in the back so I don't disturb anyone. Like, oh, no. Come on. Find him, pair him up with someone. He sits right in the second row. And I believe I was preaching that week about how God gives us second chances. And man, this man sat there and bawled. But before that happened, when the countdown came on, I had someone come up to me. They said, Eli, I don't know if you saw this. There's a guy who brought beer into the church. And I think he's been drinking. I smelled alcohol on his breath. It's like, oh yeah, Joe. That wasn't his name. But oh yeah, Joe. They're like, you know about this? Yes. Isn't this awesome? This is the heart of God. This is what church is all about. It's for the hurting and the broken and the lost. It's for the one, not the 99 who can know better or who are living a better life, but it's for the one who says, I'm at the end of myself that I got to wake up and drink at 8 a.m. This is why we do church. This is the heart of God, and I don't want to miss out on it. See, the reality is we like grace when it's given to us, but we don't like to give away grace to others. We like when people are patient with us, but we don't like to be patient with others. We like second and third chances from God, but we don't like it when God gives other people second and third chances. But let me encourage you today. If you're sitting here today and you're having the same thought as Peter, or maybe the same people in this vineyard who've been working so long, who've been coming to church for a while, and if you're starting to ask the question, well, what about me? What about me? Let me encourage you. Instead, ask this question. Instead of saying, well, what am I going to get? Say, what can I give? What can I do? What can I invest so that we can be a church that has the heart of God? So the person who walks through the doors feels God's love in their lives. Rather than saying, what can the church do for me? Say, how can I partner with God to have his heart? And let me tell you a secret. I truly believe 100% that as we come to this place, that you will learn and grow more than you ever have before. When we shift our perspective from what can I get from church to how can I be the heart of God, God steps in and he works in our lives and changes us and grows us. So as we close today, I know a little bit longer, but let me just tell you today, if you are here today and you feel like you are hurting and broken in your life, if you feel like there's an area of your life that is broken and falling apart, if you feel like there's an area that you say, I've lost hope, it's a lost cause, I don't have faith for it, let me tell you, God is in the business of fixing things. God has a heart for the lost and the broken. Maybe your whole life feels that way and you feel like, man, my life is falling apart. Let me tell you, God has a heart for lost and broken things. Let me encourage us with this very last idea, and it's this, is that we should look at the brokenness in others as a chance for God to show up. So rather than saying, man, what about me, or what about what I'm going to get, rather than looking at people and being short or judging or feeling like we're frustrated with them because they're still broken, don't look at their brokenness. Instead, see it and recognize it and say, man, I can't wait to see what God's going to do. I can't wait to see what God is going to do. So let's pray together as we close this out. God, we are so grateful that you are a God who loves us, that you're a God who sees us in our brokenness. You see us when we're hurting. You see us when we're running away. You see the things that we're hiding in our lives. God, you see all of it, and yet you still love us, you're with us, and you desire renewal and reconciliation in the midst of all of these things. God, we're grateful that that's who you are. You're a God who redeems and restores. God, I pray that we would have your heart. That as we recognize that you have a heart for the lost and the hurting and the broken, God, that you would instill that in our lives. To not ask the questions of, well, what about me, or what am I going to get? But that we would look at the brokenness in others and say, God, how can I help? How can I show them your love? How can I be the hands and feet that lift them up? To point them to you, to be a situation that they see renewed and changed through your power. God, change us. Help us to step into your heart. Let us not forget this. God, let us not forget this story, these stories that teach us a big concept. God, we love you and we thank you for all that you are. And we say all of this in Jesus' name. That's why we can come to you. That's why we can talk to you this way. So it's in Jesus' name that we say, let it all happen. Amen. Man, I'm so glad you guys were here with us today. I'm excited for this series. There's a lot of stories that Jesus tells that teach us big concepts, and they're going to build on each other too. So I hope that you're here next week as we talk more about what it looks like to execute God's heart, to have God's heart in action in our lives. So I hope to see you here next week. Bring someone with you. It's a great series because it's just talking about the teachings of Jesus. So it's a great series to bring someone with you. We love you. Glad you are here. And we will see you next week. Thanks.